It's a pleasure to have Cara Black back at the store this time for the 16th installment of her series. And in it, she takes her readers all over Paris, allowing them to enjoy its history, culture, and style through her writing while also enjoying a perfectly satisfying murder. But with this book, we're taken back in time when our seasoned and chic investigator is just a young woman throwing away a perfectly good medical career to pitch in at her father's detective agency. What a mistake. So please welcome Cara Black.
Bonsoir. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces here. Some people I last saw in Paris, you know. So, those people over there. Thank you all for coming. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. Politics and Prose. You guys have the best independent bookstore. Give them a hand. Et voilà. Bonsoir. As some of you may know, I just kill people all over Paris. But this book is a little different because it's a prequel. And we're back in 1989. Do you remember the big hair, the shoulder pads? Dallas? Okay, remember Dallas? Okay, do you remember the songs by B-52s? Love Shack? Duran Duran? Cast your mind back to that time. And the story is set in the 8th arrondissement. Okay. Yes. It's bordered by the Seine, by the Parc Monceau up at the top, where Marcel Proust used to walk. We've got the Gare Saint-Lazare over here, where that Monet painted. He sort of did a departure from Impressionism and did all these, you know, clouds of steam from the train station because that was so modern at the time. And we've got Caillebotte, Caillebotte. You've seen his paintings. I can't pronounce his name correctly, but it's those people that it's these houseman buildings. They're sort of bent against the wind or the rain. And it's, you know, the glistening cobblestones. That's the 8th arrondissement. It also has some very posh sections and some very secret gardens that I found. Who else lived there? Oh, the Élysée Palace, where the President of the Republic lives. That used to be owned by Madame de Pompadour. And you've got the Triangle d'Or, the Golden Triangle, with all the posh, you know, hotels. You've got the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, the shops, the antiques, the art galleries. A little something for everyone, and a little murder involved as well. A lot of fancy clubs for le jet set. Remember le jet set? If I may I read something? Okay. Use this book, it's okay. Got my glasses, okay. So I'm just going to read from the prologue. Paris, November 9th, 1989, a Thursday night. Standing outside the Michelin-starred restaurant, a stone's throw from the Champs-Élysées, the old man patted his stomach. The dark glass dome of the Grand Palais loomed ahead over the bare-branched trees. To his right, the circular 19th century Théâtre Marigny. No, if I don't walk home, I'll regret it tomorrow. He waved off his two drunken friends, men he'd known since his childhood in the village, as they laughingly fell into a taxi. Course had followed course, remembering the caviar-dotted lobster in a rich veloute sauce topped off by Courvoisier brandy. He rubbed his stomach again as he waved goodnight to the departing taxi. His belly was taut with discomfort. He needed to stretch it out before bed. Besides, he always enjoyed the walk home to his place on Place François Premier. Even now, after all these years, pride swelled in his chest that he had secured himself an address in Le Triangle d'Or, the Golden Triangle, the most exclusive quartier in Paris. The thrill of living among the mansions and hôtels du luxe between Avenue Montaigne, Georges V, and the Champs-Élysées never got old to him. He looped his silk scarf tight, took a deep breath of the piercing, chill November night, belched. The born farmer in him sensed tonight would bring frost, a crinkled frost that would melt on the gray cobbles like tears. In the village, it would have been a hoarfrost blanketing the earth like lace. He looked over his shoulder, force of habit, with vigilance that hadn't diminished in 40 years. They were always so careful, so scrupulous about the details, took precautions. Yet Bruno's murder had scared them all, made them wonder at the implications. Could it be? But a month passed and nothing. Were they safe? Not totally safe, not until the final trust document was rubber-stamped tomorrow. But that was only a formality. Nothing could go wrong this late in the game. He knew that. They all did. Yet why had he woken up shouting in his sleep last night? Why did Philbert's dentures grind so at dinner? And why did Alain drink a whole bottle of wine himself? Brown leaves gusted against his ankles. On his right, a blurred Arc de Triomphe glowed like a painting on a postage stamp further down the Champs-Élysées. He kept a brisk pace, got his blood flowing, warmed up. He was fit as a fiddle, his doctor said. His heart was like that of a man 20 years younger. A couple passed, huddling together in the cold. Walking under the barren trees by the Grand Palais, he became aware of footsteps behind him. The footsteps stopped when he did. But as he turned at the intersection in front of the zebra crossing, he saw no one. Nerves. The light turned green. He crossed. Midway down the next block, he heard the footsteps again. Turned. Who's there? Only a dark hedgerow, shadows cast from trees. Unease prickled the hairs on his neck. He walked faster now, looking for a taxi. Silly. He lived 2 blocks away. But he never ignored a feeling like this. Each taxi passed with a red light, crowning the roof, occupied. Stupid. Why hadn't he taken the taxi with the others? Kept to their protocol of precautions. His meal, rich in cream, sat in his stomach like a dead weight. Every time he heard the footsteps, he turned and saw no one. Paranoid? Or was he losing his mind? Or was the brandy heightening sensations and dulling his reflexes? Then a taxi with a green light slowed. He waved it down. Thank God. Merci, he said, shutting the taxi's door, breathing heavily. I'm only supposed to stop at the taxi stand, monsieur. Then I'll make it worth your while in appreciation. He gave the address. But that's only 2 blocks from here. Consider your fare doubled, monsieur. The taxi pulled away from the curb. He asked the driver to close his window. But the driver ignored him and turned toward the river. Not the way home at all. Ahead, street lamps rimmed the quay, their globes of light reflecting yellow shimmers on the moving Seine. His heavy insides curdled. You're going the wrong way. The taxi accelerated, throwing him against the back of the seat. Stop! He tried the handle, locked. Afraid now, he pounded the plastic partition and tried reaching for the driver's shoulder. The wheels rumbled down a cobblestoned ramp. Let me out! He didn't even realize where they were until the taxi stopped. The taxi had lurched to a halt below the Pont des Invalides, nestled in the shadow of its arch support. Mist floated over the Seine, the gurgling water swollen by early November rain. And then the door opened, and before he could defend himself, his arms were pulled behind him. Take my money, just take what you want. You know what's going to happen, don't you? Said a voice. He gasped. Please let me go. Don't you remember the river? Panic flooded him. No, you must understand it. It wasn't supposed to happen. We can make it right. Liar. Payback time. A rag was stuffed into his screaming mouth. His bile rose and all the rich food lodged in his gullet, choking him. You remember, don't you? It's your turn now. He was shoved to the edge of the quay and down into a squat. Through his blinding terror, he saw one of his shoes fall into the water below. The lapping waves from a receding barge and the faint rhythm of faraway car horns masked his cry of pain. Even the lit globes of the sodium lamps faded into the mist on the cloud-blanketed night. How does it feel? The voice hissed. But he couldn't answer as the sour-tasting gag tightened across his mouth. His tied hands gripped and flailed. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. The shot to the back of his head was muffled by the plastic Vichy bottle used as a silencer in the rumble of the traffic overhead. That's just the beginning. So that's the prologue to this story, set in 1989. I'll just tell you a little something. My editor had read the draft after I sent it in, and she said, I think I've done a little something different with it this time. I said, really? And when I read this, she had put that piece I just read to you as a prologue, which was part of a bigger piece. And I said, really? And she said, what do you think? And I said, well, 15 books, I've never had a prologue. And she said, Cara, it's not against the law. Live dangerously. Maybe you can do a prologue. And I think it works. I hope you agree. And so the story in the past, set in 1942, occupied France, kind of weaves through, hopefully dovetailing into the story. It's a story that shows Aimée Leduc, my detective, in med school, much younger, more naive, innocent. She's living at home with her father, Jean-Claude, and who we've never met actually because he's been dead in all the books, sorry, but you get to meet him here. And her grandfather, Claude, who we've also never met. Now, Claude originally bought the apartment on Ile Saint-Louis. Claude had been with the Sûreté, the old name for the police homicide squad. Claude had left and started Leduc Detective, not Duluc, we know that. Leduc Detective after that, and he specialized in finding missing people. Then his son took it over, Jean-Claude, when he was kicked out of the force. And so that's the detective agency that Aimée has inherited. But when we meet her, she's in med school. You know, she's slept in the back of the car with her father on stakeouts, but, you know, she's going into med school. And her father, Jean-Claude, is so proud and really wants her to make it and have a profession and do something good. And so is Morbier, her godfather, the commissaire, who we've met in several books. He's like, why are you here? What are you doing? You should be hitting the books. I mean, come on, you know, because med school in France is so competitive. Well, of course, it's competitive everywhere, but the system in France is that in the École de Médecins, which Aimée is, they take a lot of people in. Only 15% go to the second year. They just winnow it down. So there's a lot of sabotage in exams, and so it's very, very competitive. So she's dealing with that. She's dealing with her father who wants her to, you know, study. And she's dealing with this boyfriend who, you know, everything was going great until she finds out, you know, he's getting engaged this weekend, you know? I mean, so... you know, little things like that, I mean, are happening. So that's who we meet. We get to meet René Friant, who's been a character in many of the books, see how they meet. And the dog, Miles Davis, how he comes into her life. Everyone wanted to know about that one. So we also so Claude, her grandfather, he's a man who haunts the art auctions. He's a bon vivant. He likes to cook. Unfortunately, his granddaughter, Aimée, did not inherit that gene. And he has a mistress. And he's so wonderful. I fell in love with him when I was writing him. And he's someone who says to Aimée he wants her to do what she wants, to follow her passion. Okay? So there's that whole thing at home happening. It's also a chance because in the stories, Aimée's American mother, who left her, Sydney Leduc, left Aimée in the family when she was 8 years old. And it's always been hidden why. There's secrets about that. Her father won't talk about her. And a friend of mine said, you know, I'd really love to know how these two very different people, because Aimée's father, Jean-Claude, had been a policeman and a detective, and her American mother, a radical, you know, out demonstrating. How did these two very different people come together? Of course, had a child, but there's this bond, this thing holding them together, which we kind of understand later. Everybody, you know, wanted to see that. So, et voilà, you get to see them together. it was something I felt we needed to see. So we answer a lot of questions in this story, but not all of them, of course. It's a time where this weekend was important because that was when the Berlin Wall fell. Remember that? 1989, this weekend in November. And what I have read doing research on that was that the old Stasi headquarters, that as you went up to it, there were these billows of smoke coming out. Those were the files they were burning. Of course, they were selling all the others to the highest bidder. So there was so much going on because of informants and people keeping files on other people. And I really wanted to talk about that because in the 70s, I went to Berlin when it was still divided, communist Germany, the Iron Curtain. I went to Berlin, East Berlin, for one day on a visa. And I went through, and I had a little Kodak Instamatic camera. Some of you younger people here might not know what those are, but little teeny cameras. And on the wall, it had written, "No photos, verboten." But, of course, I didn't think it was for me, right? So I started snapping photos of the wall from the East Berlin side. And I got pulled in for questioning by the Stasi for 3 hours. And I was, kind of young, and I was irate at the time, thinking, you can't do this. Isn't this, I was about to say free country, like no way, right? But, I'm thinking, oh, you can't do this. And then after 2 hours, I started getting really nervous, thinking, why am I here? He was giving me a hard time. He confiscated my camera, and that was it. But as I walked out through Checkpoint Charlie, I thought, boy, I'm lucky to walk out of here, And I really wanted to bring that experience out. And maybe 3 years ago, I went to Berlin with my friend who had grown up in East Germany, and we went to the Brandenburg Gate at night. It's all redone, beautifully spotlit. And we walked through, and we both started crying because we thought never in our lives would we walk through that gate. I mean, it's just kind of amazing what a profound effect, Europe suffered. So that's sort of where that part came from. And my editor, when she finished reading Murder on the Champ de Mars, the book before this, at the end of that story, set in 99, somebody very close to Aimée was going into the emergency room because of what she had done to that person. Didn't know if this person would live or die. And my editor said, I just finished the book. I was crying. Is that person going to live? And I said, I don't know. I was crying too, and I don't know if that person is going to live or what Aimée will do in her life. And she said, perfect. Time for a prologue. A prologue, prequel. So that's what I wrote, the prequel set in 1989, to go back into Aimée's life to sort of come to this origin story. And that's where it came about. And there's another story to this as well. I live in San Francisco. My neighbor is French. And when my son was about 5, he's now taller than I am, she said, why don't you come to France with us? Because my kids are about 2 and 3. Stay with my family in Paris and go to the countryside. Come to the Loire Valley with us and stay in my father's house. Now I'm thinking Loire Valley, chateau, right? Chateau. They have a chateau. And well, we got there. It wasn't a chateau, but it was beautiful, this beautiful, beautiful farmhouse. And her father had grown up in this village. And he restored their house. It had a garden with fruit trees, and it went to a small river. And he said, I grew up here. My mother was a village school teacher. And I remember when my friends couldn't come to class across the river, across the bridge. And I said, well, why was that? And he goes, well, they didn't have the pass. I said, what do you mean? Well, that was German-occupied France. The river was the demarcation point. We were in Vichy, free, le zone libre, free France, as you called it, and they couldn't come to school because they didn't have this permission. This was up until November of 1942. So I was asking him all about it. I was, I'm nosy anyway, but I was really curious. What would it be like growing up in this village during wartime with divided, German-occupied and free France? And he started telling me about it. And he said, I could hear the Germans talking because, the river, like at the end of the store, that's where the river, and there was the village right there. He could hear them. And then one day we went walking on the river, and we went to sort of where there was a field, and he said, this is where we found someone. I said, you found him? He goes, yeah, there was a man from the village. He was here. We were going fishing, and his body was here, and he was shot in the back of the head. And I said, was this the Germans? Was the resistance? What happened? He goes, I don't know. I was a young boy. My father got very mad that I had actually come and seen this. The next day, we were in the village for the market, Saturday market, which is the big event, of course, in the village. And we were there. We bought a lot of vegetables. I remember we put the kids in the car when they had car seats. That's how small they were. Putting the vegetables in the trunk. And he said to me, his name was Jacques, I saw him. I saw the man who killed that man on the river. I said, what? There was a whole bunch of people older men in this village square talking, drinking, laughing. And he goes, and then we got in the car and we couldn't talk because the kids, right? So we drive away, and the next day, Sunday at lunch, the big French family luncheon, and I said, what about this? He obviously must have heard as a young boy, maybe his parents talking at night, or, if he knew this man was still alive and in the village. And his whole family, my friend, her husband, her brother, had never heard this story. He had never told them, which was, it was true. It was really interesting. And I thought, why did he tell me? I'm nosy, okay, I'm curious, but maybe because sometimes you tell an outsider things that you don't tell your family. And then, I don't know, the day after we were driving and we had the kids in the car, we'd gone to visit a chateau, we're coming back, and coming into the village, we passed this beautiful gate with this beautiful house behind it. And he goes, that's where the man lives. That's where the assassin lives. And then we drove on and the kids woke up and we couldn't talk about it anymore. And I thought, what about that? This man still lives here. He's obviously doing okay. And what did that mean? That everyone in the village must have known this story. And what does that mean? Think of the weight, the burden of secrets. This was 50 years after the war, but people still knew. What was that weight about? So I said to Jacques, I really want to know more. And he said, when we're back in Paris. We never had time. And sadly, Jacques has passed away. But I sort of took this story, which kind of as writers, you start to think, what if there's a whole other backstory to this crime? And this is a real location. I changed geographically. I changed the names of the villages because they still have the house there. And, I didn't want to use that. So that's kind of my story, and I'm sticking to it. It was really, really an amazing time, too. I also, because we talk about some of the clubs, because Champs-Élysées is, fancy, and there are many nightclubs on the street running parallel, Rue Ponthieu, and I was very lucky to meet an officer from the Vice Squad who has that as his beat, the nightclubs off the Champs-Élysées. It was pretty cool. I heard a lot about high-end crime. I heard about the what it is. There's the clubs that you go to, and then there's the after clubs, then there's the after clubs, and after clubs till it's time to, it's morning. So really interesting, that whole other slice of life. I have time to tell one more story? Okay. So, because I'm talking a lot here, but I want to tell you all about this. But so my friend, another reason I picked the 8th arrondissement, my friend worked in a private bank on Boulevard Haussmann, and I would go meet her for lunch. We would maybe go up to the Musée Jacquemart-André to have lunch. Wonderful, wonderful lunchroom. It's gorgeous. And then I would meet her sometimes after work for an apéro. And we would meet, and I was always passing by this very small rectangular square, and there were these Gothic struts, sort of from a building, kind of like Notre Dame, that style, coming out through the leaves of the trees. It was very mysterious. It looked like a ruin. And then I'd pass it again, and finally I said, I have to find out. I got off the bus. I went in, and it's this small square with this chapel d'expiatoire, a chapel that was built there. It is open one time a year. It's in the center of Paris. And the reason being is that it was built on the site of where they brought the bodies from the revolution, you know, the guillotine during the revolution at the Place de la Concorde. It's not far away. They'd bring them in the carts. And Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were also in those carts. And this used to be a big pit. They dumped all the bodies into the pit, covered it over during the revolution. One of the Bourbon descendants got all upset in the 1800s and says, this is wrong, let's exhume the bodies. And supposedly, and this is the story I like, that they could identify Marie Antoinette by her garters. And they reburied them in the cathedral in Saint-Denis, where all the kings and queens are buried, and built this chapel for this mass one time a year, where a lot of the aristocrats go. And I thought, this is just too good not to use, you know, in the story. So if you go to Paris and you ever get in that chapel, I want to report. Do you have any comments or questions?
Please feel free to ask. There's a microphone right there and just say what you like. Thank you.
Hi, Cara. My name's Jennifer. I'm a big fan of your books. I read all of them. And I'm curious, as you're writing about, you know, the background and the story of Aimée and her family and things, did it make you think of her differently, like as a woman, as your character? Did you find things about her that you didn't know, or had you already had it planned what her background was like and what her history was?
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Good question. You know, I think subconsciously I felt those things, but I had never really explored them, especially her fashion gene, you know, the fashionista with the Chanel and being able to find that vintage piece and knowing and putting it together. I knew she had that. I didn't know how it came about. So that was really fun to explore. I didn't know a lot about her because I always kept moving her forward, you know, all the stories set in the 90s. So I went back and I sort of put her at the kitchen table with her father, and in my mind, and thought about how they would talk and how she would be at 19 years old, you know, and the powerful pull of her father who had raised her, you know, that's who she knew, her father, such a force in her life, and how she wanted to please him, as I think many of us want to please our parents, but, you know, we're rebels or we want to do different things. And so that's what I, you know, realized I needed to kind of explore. But that's a great question. Thank you. Nobody else was a rebel at 19?
Well, there's someone coming to the microphone right there, and then you can be next. You can go right up there next.
Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself. For example, how did you come to this genre of literature? Where did you grow up? How did you get to San Francisco?
By plane. No, I was born in Chicago, and we moved to San Francisco Bay Area when I was 5. My father, who's from Chicago, and my uncle, who lived with us for a while, were Francophiles, and some of you have heard this story before. But my dad sent me to a French Catholic school with nuns who wore the wimple, and they had no peripheral vision. So I always say we got away with murder. You know, convent girls, really. So I don't know why my dad he loved good French food. I don't know what the big draw was because we have no French blood in our family at all. But he really, and he was a reader. My dad was a super reader. We read in our family. When he retired, he read a book a day. Yeah.
But you were educated in France.
No, I was educated by the nuns in the San Francisco Bay Area, French nuns.
Oh, I see.
Who taught us archaic French.
And
Yeah.
that led you to French literature and French culture?
Yes.
And then when did you first go to France?
I went when I was about 18. I went backpacking when there was a book called Europe on $5 a day. Tammy has no idea what that means, right? Younger people. But it really existed. But I was hitchhiking and, you know, staying in hostels. And so when I went there, to Paris the first time, there was, and my uncle lived with us for a while, and he had studied art on the GI Bill after World War II. And he just drank a lot of red wine, I think. But he had these stories at dinner. And I think when I first went to Paris, it felt very, very familiar, you know. Things felt familiar, but I was an outsider. I'm still an outsider. But I would speak French because I, had learned French, and I would start talking, and some man would say to me in perfect English, you are using words we have not used since the 1900s. It was those nuns. So I had this strange relationship with France.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Cara.
Hi.
Catherine from the Paris tour and a fellow San Franciscan. Amy's mother continues to make cameo appearances. And come on, we're up to the 16th book. Can you explain how a Red Brigade-ish American radical from the 70s gets involved with Hezbollah? That threw me for a loop in this book. So.
They were sending a lot of people. And the Bader Meinhof, the real Bader Meinhof, what was her name? All those people. They went to Syria and they were trained. Syria, always Syria, isn't it? But a long time ago, they were trained there. And all the radicals, all these people went. But these were the early Bader Meinhof. So these were the ones in the 70s and 70s. Because they were I don't know, but I think they were kind of a revolt against, this complacent, consumerist German society full of what they thought was old Nazis, whether that's true or not. But so they were sort of against everything, and they did go to Syria. So I thought Aimée's mother would go as well. I couldn't really use their name. Actually, Ulrike Meinhof, that's it. Her daughter's still alive, and she's a journalist. Can you imagine? You might, but I can't tell you. I'd have to kill you right now. Wouldn't want to do that. Yeah. Yeah. I think we might hear more about her mother. Yeah.
Could you tell the story again that, when you wrote the letter to, I don't want to give things away, and he writes back and you going up. Could you tell that story again?
Sure. If you don't mind hearing it again. This kind of goes to your question as well. So I was in high school in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I had to do a book report. I went to the library. I found a book by Romain Gary, who wrote, and it was Promise at Dawn. And it was, I don't know why I sort of picked it. It sounded French, I guess. And I read it, and I was like blown away. The master of prose in this story, it just touched me like I'd never been touched. And the writing was gorgeous. He won the Prix Goncourt. And he won it twice. You're not supposed to, but he used another name, Émile Ajar. Anyway, so I did my book. I read it. I did my book report. I wrote him a letter when we had, we put stamps on letters and mailed them. And I probably sent it to the publisher in New York. I'm not sure. Gushing, letter. And at the end of the summer, I went to the mailbox. And in the mailbox was a letter with a French stamp on it, addressed to Mademoiselle Black, and I'm like, oh my God. And it was Monsieur Gary writing me back, thanking me for writing him, handwritten. So I kind of looked on the back of the envelope, and it was his return address, 108 Rue du Bac. So I kind of took that as a personal invitation. So when I did go to France, on Europe, on $5 a day, I remember I thought, well, I will visit Monsieur Gary. I have his address, I'm sure I was wearing like a flannel shirt and jeans, probably, But I went down Rue du Bac. I went, and there's now a plaque outside the building. You can see it too. And I went in the beautiful building in the courtyard, up these stairs, red carpet with those brass rods holding it, the stained glass windows, giant, huge carved wooden door, knocked on it. And this man answered, and he had this black hair sticking up, these blue turquoise eyes and this mustache, amazing looking. And he looked at me and said, do I know you? And I said, oh, Monsieur Gary, I wrote you a letter, right? Like he never gets fan mail. Like, don't you remember? Just you know, what you do when you're that age. And he looked at me and he goes, just a moment. And he slammed the door, you know, and I'm like, "Oh, you know, this is a faux pas. You don't do this. This was wrong. I leave. And I was turning around to leave, and he opened the door and said, would you like to go for a coffee? And I went, yeah. So we walked down Rue du Bac, which at the time was torn up, building the metro, to the first cafe on the corner, where we walked in, and on the zinc countertop was an espresso and a cigar waiting for Monsieur Gary, because he went in every day, and that was his, you know, habit. And the cafe man said, well, what about her? And Monsieur Gary said, well, she will have the same. So I had my first cigar and my first espresso. And lived to tell. You know, I was trying not to cough and choke and speak and drink, and, you know, it was pretty heady stuff. He was very, very generous, very nice. He had just broken up with the actress Jean Seberg, if you remember. So you've heard the story again. Et voila. Yeah.
There's time for one more question if anyone would like to ask.
Yes.
Can you give us several examples of those archaic French words, please?
Several examples of the French words. Well, one off the bat, because my friend Anne's daughters are like 5 now. One's 5, one's 10. And I was saying, well, let me help you put on your souliers. And she's going, Mama, what is Cara saying? And souliers. I said, yeah, we're going to tie your souliers, right? Tie your shoes. She goes, no, those are chaussures. And my friend Anne goes, it's okay. She talks like grandma sometimes. It's all right. When I learned, souliers were shoes, right? And chaussures are the common words. That's the one that, you know, so the kids are always catching me. What's that word? Why does she speak like grandma? But, you know, I mean, the French, when I meet the police and I hang out with them, I mean, argot, you know, ding, ding, and they speak fast, and you know, it's really quick, and there are special terms for things, and they pun. You know, French people like to pun. They pun a lot, and so I don't get all of that, but I just try to keep up, you know. Sometimes there's a new word for something, and I'm like, they kind of drop words, like what's one, the Café des Philosophes, you know, where they go on Sundays and argue about philosophy, or they call it, you know, and it's, les philo, let's go to les philo. So I have to kind of go back and kind of think, what is les philo? It means the Café of the Philosophes. Does that do it? Yes.
What is the date of the year that the church is open?
Good question. It's in January. I don't know. You can probably go on the website. There's a website, I think, for it. And actually, just before I went on the book tour, I was checking it out, and they were having a historical conference about the royalty. When did I start this? In June, middle of June. That Sunday, the church was open for a historical conference. So maybe in the summer they do this every, you know, like once a month on a Sunday. So, but I think, you know, I don't want to be, you know, but I know it's in January. I'm sure, look on the Google, the Chapel des Expiatoires. Really interesting people go to that mass. You know, the Ancien Régime, the Catholic aristocrats. You know, maybe they're going to open it more because, I mean, these people are getting older, you know, and got to encourage the young aristocrats to take ownership of this, I guess. Yeah. How much time do I spend in Paris? Never enough. I usually go twice a year to do research. I stay with my friend, and that's how I can go. Last year, I was there longer because we had the tour, and it was a lot of fun. And it just kind of depends. I can only do it when I stay with my friend, or I couch surf, or I cat sit. I often cat sit. But the cat is sadly passed away, not on my watch. But so I'm waiting for her to get a new kitten. Everyone, bring a kitten, everyone says. Yeah.
One last question.
Great. How did you start the relationship you have with Les Filles, and then how has that grown? It seems you get a lot of good stuff in your books from them. So was that
How did I start the relationship with les flics, the cops? Well, years ago, before I was published, who am I, right? Just a nosy American, with bad shoes asking questions. So I had to kind of find someone who, in France, a lot of it is by introduction, I really, I wanted to write about the Marais, my first book, and this was before the internet, when we, wrote letters. This was in the early 90s, and how would I meet a policeman who might have, dealt with a crime like this? And so I went, I started asking questions. I did write a letter. I got a tour of the prefecture, 36 Quai des Orfèvres, and they were like, then they realized that I wasn't published. So I was kind of like, ooh. But you got to start somewhere, right? So I got some names, and then when I did get published, I went back. I had questions about a different arrondissement, a different kind of crime. So I found this person, said, he said, I don't know, but I went to the police academy with, Philippe. Let's meet with Philippe. That's really kind of how it's gone. And I've been very lucky to meet some really top people, because now that I'm published, right, it's kind of, I look good. So I've got some cred. And they also, what I've found is they talk to me because they want me to get it right. And I'm sure other authors who write crime novels or, who talk to specialists, forensics or MO people, you always talk to an expert. And usually they're very generous of their time because they want you to get it right. It's not like CSI, It's really different, and, real investigation takes time, and there's all these problems, the lab is backed up, it doesn't happen like this. But they're very serious, that they want me to get it right. I take them to lunch, or I take them out, I buy them wine, I pour, I keep pouring, and they start talking. But I find now as my books get, we're up to 99 in the latest, they're some of them are retiring, or they're happy to talk about something in the past, right? Because it's not current. So they'll tell me about it. I'll say, I really want to write about this. Oh, I know him, and we never did it this way. You're making it too complicated, sometimes they say, or we'd never do it like this. One time I wrote a scene, and I spoke to this man who was in charge of the Princess Diana investigation. Yeah, he's a whole story in himself, a real character. But I had written a scene, and I went over it with him in a cafe. And he goes, no. I told you once, I told you twice, we don't do it like that. And I'm like, okay, because it's quite a different system than our system. And I went, and I went back to the house, and I said to my friend, I have to throw it all away, it's all wrong. And she goes, is your audience primarily American? I go, yeah. She goes, do you think they would know the difference? And I said, no, but now that I know, I would, and I can't do that. So I went, I rewrote it, I mean, if I know, I'm going to put it right, some things I honestly don't know, and I think it worked, it was fine, but if they give me, and they're generous to give me their time, I really want to get it right. So thank you very much. We have bags. We have another trip to Paris. Come see about it if you're interested. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming out, Washington. Thank you. Thank you.